Hello Internet, Steven here with Rabbit Hobbies. You said it couldn't be done.
Skiba, you move.
If they fit so toy!
Ho-ho! Wajini?
That there's no way to paint Battletech wrong. Is that a challenge? Well, I'm no quitter. I got that dog in me. No, not that dog.
I come home and I pet my dog. Petting your dog is one of the most relaxing things you can possibly do.
Yeah, that's about right. The color cubes are back. We'll be using them to generate some more random color schemes. This time around, we have a Shadow Hawk and a Phoenix Hawk to paint. Is it going to be good enough looking that I want to paint a whole lance of these? Or is it going to get left by the wayside like some Periphery reject or Solaris Gladiator we're going to feed to the pit? Maybe I accidentally paint a faction. It happened last time with Legion of Vega. If these guys look like anything you recognize, leave it in the comments and let me know. Let's see how we do. Alright, we're all set up. We're ready to generate our first color scheme. Rather, I guess our third color scheme, because this is kind of round 3. Last round I did a Griffin and a Wolverine. This time we have a Phoenix Hawk and a Shadow Hawk. And I'll be using Color Cube Volume 1, so I need a number between 1 and 250. So let's take a look. 1 and 250. And let's go. 108. 108. Let's see, 107. Oh, that's so close to last time. 107 was the Wolverine last time. And 108. Ooh. Okay. Oh, I could work with this. Looks like wheat. We got so dark blue, royal blue, apple green, kale, and dark green. Wow, so our Phoenix Hawk is going to be 108. Right, so I had several paint ranges to pick from. The closest matches that I found were in the Army Painter Warpaint's Fanatic range. Now the dark blue on the card is actually closer to more of a purple. And the best match that I could find in my collection was actually Terrestrial Titan, which is part of the purple triad. As you can see, it matches up pretty closely to what we have on the card. This will be my shadow color. Now the closest I could find for a match for the royal blue was in the Strong Pale Blues triad. Now I went with Triumphant Navy, Ultramarine Blue, and Alpha Blue. This should hopefully give me a nice gradient like we see in the picture. So we have this almost black green, and we also have Kale, which is an olive, and then Apple Green, which is this very bright yellow green. For the Kale, I selected 2 paints out of the Olive Green triad, Woodland Camo and Army Green. There isn't really a green as dark as the dark green on this card. To make do, I'll be adding black to one of these greens. Now for the super bright yellow green that is Apple Green, I dipped into the Vibrant Green triad. Electric Lime and Vivid Volt seem like a good fit. I'm going to fade from the darker greens into this light green. So in using card 108 for inspiration, I decided to flip it over on its head. I think I'll go with the yellow-green on top, fading through green and finally into the blue on the bottom. I'll be using the purple in the darkest shadows from underneath. For this color fade, I'm definitely going to want to use my airbrush. I'll have to break out the Silly Putty to do some masking as well, because I don't want to get the green everywhere. I want to preserve the purple and the blue. But I don't want a really sharp transition in the middle either, so this will be a bit of an experiment. Alright, so we have our color scheme for our Phoenix Hawk, but what about our Shadow Hawk? This will be using Color Cube Volume 2, and we'll need a number between 251 and 500. Let's go! 456. So way late in the game here. Let's see, 456. 456. I can't grab these. 456. that's kind of cool.
He's so fluffy, I'm gonna die!
Ooh, okay. Marigold, silver, gray, charcoal, and black. Spat on the card. Gross.
Ew.
So our Shadowhawk is going to be 456. All right, color scheme for the Shadowhawk. I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Paint it like the cat. I'll paint all the armor in these shades of black and gray, and then I'll paint the cockpit in this marigold yellow. This time around, I decided to use the Pro Acryl range from Monty Hobbies. For the grays, we'll use coal black, dark warm gray, and bright neutral gray. I use bright neutral gray for the silver because the warm neutral gray is more of a beige. Now for the yellows, I picked out dark golden brown, yellow ochre, and golden brown. Now because I'm going to be simulating a highly reflective canopy, I'll need to go even brighter, so I pulled some pale yellow as well. If you saw the first part of the series, you'll know that I paint my canopies the way that I paint jewels in Warhammer. My goal is to make this canopy look like the cat's eye. Alright, that's the plan. Pretty simple scheme, but I think it's going to look good. I think I'll need to do some weathering and maybe some decals to make it pop. One problem I used to have when painting miniatures was figuring out how to hold them. I used to accidentally rub paint off, so I made these painting handles. I attached the miniatures to these using some poster tack. These are basically just wooden dowels with washers glued onto them. These are about 32 millimeters in diameter, and I find them perfectly comfortable for long painting sessions. Now before painting, you always gotta prime. Now for me that means an airbrush, but for you it might mean a rattle can or even brush-on primer. I decided on using Stynel Res Gray Primer. I've had issues with rattle cans where I've sprayed too thick, and I've had issues with other brands of airbrush primer where the primer flakes off the model or chips. Now I've also used Mr. Hobby Primer, which is popular in Gunpla, but I have found that I just don't like how toxic that stuff is. The Stynel Res stuff just goes on smooth, doesn't chip, and is not as toxic. Plus there's no mixing involved. But definitely wear a mask. Alright, wait time to dry and then we're ready to paint. Now for a nice shadow color for the blue, I went with Terrestrial Titan. Now these war paints are super thick. You really have to shake the crap out of them to mix them properly. To save my wrists some pain, I use my lab mixer. I'm going to be using a lot of airbrushing on this color fade. I always start with the same mix, a few drops of flow improver, and some airbrush thinner. This is always something that I do when airbrushing, and it's doubly important with a very thick paint like the Warpaints Fanatic range. Now I'm not going to show this step every single time that I airbrush in this video, but trust me, every airbrushing session starts with flow improver. Just a quick mix. Now I'm airbrushing this dark purple color in as a shadow color. I'll be focusing on the bottom of the miniature. My goal is to build up from this, but I want to keep some of it in the deepest shadows. Alright, for the next layer I'm using Triumphant Navy. I'm spraying this from not quite 45 degrees above. My goal is to cover about 75% of the blue areas I've already painted in this color, but still preserving those dark shadows. For the next layer, I added in some ultramarine blue. I didn't clean the airbrush in between these steps, I just added the lighter shade to the mix. Also gradually I'm increasing the angle in which I'm spraying, focusing more on the top edges of the miniature. Next I went even brighter by adding in some alpha blue. I want to make sure I go real bright because I will darken everything down with an oil wash. This, as you can see, I am spraying from almost directly above. I want to be careful not to blow out my shadow colors here. Alright, to set up my base for the greens, I'm going with Army Green and Woodland Camo. Now I needed to push the green a little bit darker to match the card. Now unlike many colors, green is one of those colors where you can add a little bit of black to it and darken it up. Many colors, if you try to do this, will shift the hue way too far, but to get a darker green it works. I didn't bother masking because I want to get a bit of a color fade going here. I am very careful at this stage to make sure that I am spraying upwards away from the blue, however. This is also important because this dark green is going to be my shadow color for the green parts of the model. Now I still had to get the arms and I was worried about overspray, so I used a bit of paper to mask the area. In a pinch, this is way faster than having to mask off a model completely. Alright, so the blue is done and now we have our shadow color for the green. That gun barrel will get metallics later, so no worries about that. For our first highlight for the green, I'll do a layer of Army Green. Again, not worried about masking yet. just making sure that I'm not spraying downwards where it'll get too much on the blue. The masking will come in later when I have to spray from a sharper angle to get those upper highlights. For now, it's just airbrush control. Alright, time for some masking with some silly putty and Tamiya tape. I use the Tamiya tape to mask under the arms because there's not a lot of clearance there. Now for the silly putty, I just make big ol' sheets all around him, with the goal of covering up all of the blue that I spent so much time on. The greens are going to be getting brighter, and I'm going to have to spray from a steeper angle. So without this step, there'd be no way to avoid the overspray. So for the first of the brighter layers, I'm going to be using electric lime mixed with the woodland camo from the previous layer. This is sprayed at a slightly higher angle to make sure that I preserve that shadow color. Now it occurred to me here that the electric lime was a very transparent paint, and to get the vibrancy that I'm looking for, I need an extra step here. I decided to add a little splash of pale yellow that I will paint over to brighten up that color. This I sprayed as a zenithal, basically top down. Now it might look like I'm ruining it here, or I'm blowing it out too much. But this will give a nice base for that very transparent but very vibrant electric lime to work from. This time I'm going pure electric lime. And with that pale yellow base, it's coming in much more vibrant. Now it's starting to look pretty good, but I want more. More vibrancy, more punch. I decided to go fluorescent with Data System Glow. Now this really punched up the color. It's actually way brighter in person, something to do with the nature of these fluorescent paints. Other upside, he also glows under a blacklight now. Alright, now I'm pretty happy with how the green is looking. We can see a gradient from the lighter to the darker green. We still have our shadow colors preserved. I think it's time to pull off the silly putty. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this step super satisfying. Alright, here he is, looking pretty good. Tiny bit of cleanup I have to do with the lines a little sharp, but I already expected that. Not bad. Just to show you I wasn't kidding about the whole blacklight thing. Alright, so I decided at this point that I like this color scheme. In fact, I like it enough that I want a whole lance of these guys. So I went ahead and filled out the lance with a Jenner, a Warhammer, and a Stalker. Now I've got one mech of each size. Alright, so the mechs are looking pretty good so far, but I still have this janky transition in the middle that I want to fix. I need to make this more smooth. To do this, I'm going to airbrush a little bit of alpha blue without using any masking and try and smooth out this transition. Now this I am spraying right at that seam at the waist, really trying to smooth out this transition. Overall, I feel like it looks a lot better after this change. I went ahead and fixed his lance mates too while I was at it. I found the Jenner and the Stalker to be particularly easy to fix without arms. Right, with that, the airbrush work is basically done. Now it's time to whip out our brushes. For regular acrylic paints, I almost always use my wet palette. Next, I'm using Electric Lime, Vivid Volt, and Afterglow. I decided to use this triad for edge highlighting my green. I started with a blend of my two darker colors. Pretty basic, bog standard edge highlighting. I focused on the lighter green areas of the model. I will edge highlight the areas that are in shadow, but for that I'll use a darker green. You could consider edge highlighting after airbrushing to be optional, but I feel like it really helps on Battlemechs. Quick pro tip for me on edge highlighting, I like to use drying retarder or slow dry medium. When you blend this into your paint, you get a longer working time. This helps keep the paint on your brush damp. Now to edge highlight in the shadows, I mixed in some army green. I still want to emphasize the edges of the model, but if I were to use my lighter color in the shadows, it just wouldn't look right. So I go in here and edge highlight with a slightly darker tone. Now for the highest highlights, I'm going up to my brighter color. And I find that when you're doing whites or cream paints, the drying retarder really helps. I went ahead and I repeated this whole process for the Stalker, the Jenner, and the Warhammer. The Stalker in particular had really sharp, crisp edges, and this was a breeze. And to be honest, the airbrushing did a lot of the hard work for me. The Jenner was similar. Armless mechs are just fundamentally easier to paint. Less to get in the way, less to worry about masking off. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I find edge highlighting to be very tedious. But it's a necessary evil. Moving on to the Warhammer, and man, this guy has a lot of edges. But I have a real fondness for this mech. I remember using him in Mech Warrior 2 way back in the day. It's important to note that when I highlight a gradient like this, I'm switching back and forth between colors on my palette. Going for lighter colors on the upper side of the model, and I'm going for darker colors on the lower side. In the middle, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. This is really good practice for me because even though I come from a Warhammer background, I haven't painted a ton of Space Marines. A lot more organic looking stuff. My Tyranids are my main army, also Imperial Guard, Skaven, and Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I feel like people that were Space Marine players would have an easy time jumping into Battletech, at least from a painting perspective. Now the same process for the blue with Ultramarine Blue and Alpha Blue. And for the highest highlight here, Augur Blue. Same process as before, starting with a mix of my two darker tones. Always roll your brush to maintain a tip. Once again, highlighting the Jenner was easy mode. Lots of big, sharp, blocky angles. No brain cells necessary. The Phoenix Hawk, however, was a whole other story. This took a lot more time.
Damn, cuz, your head is big as shiznit.
To show you what I mean, I figured I would time-lapse the process. This should give you an idea of how many teeny tiny fiddly edges there are on this model. I do really love the way the Phoenix Hawk looks, however. It really gives off Macross or Gundam vibes, which is to be expected. I've heard there was some, let's say, cross-pollination of ideas between the two franchises. Battletech and Macross, that is. Now, out of all four of the mechs in this lance, this Phoenix Hawk by far took the longest time to edge highlight. Quick question for longtime Battletech fans. What do you think is the hardest mech to paint? Let me know in the comments. Alright, Phoenix Hawk is done. With the edge highlighting at least. Same process for the other mechs, albeit much faster. Hey, while you're watching my time-lapse, could you do me a favor? If you're enjoying what I'm making here on YouTube, could you give me a like and subscribe? Most of the channel's watch hours and views are coming from non-subscribers, and it really helps a channel like ours grow. Again, Stalker, super easy for this step of the process. So real quick, what faction do you think these guys would be? I've already solicited some feedback, and I have some things I cannot unsee.
We have a Hulk.
Yeah, that one is definitely stuck in my head now. Also...
Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior.
Who are you calling inferior?
Yep. Okay, some of you might be hype about Battletech Gothic, some of you not so much. But come on guys, Transformers AU when? Hey, maybe the Irby can transform into something useful. Alright, time for some metallics, and for this I'll be using Vallejo Metal Color Aluminum. This is a wonderful, very thin, very fluid airbrush paint, but I also love it as a brush-on paint. I use this to paint barrels, joints, and other metallic bits on the mechs. This stuff does kind of flow like a speed paint, so you gotta be careful not to overload your brush. This step, compared to all the edge highlighting, was over in a flash. This is especially true again for the armless mechs, which is becoming a theme.
Is this easy mode?
Maybe I need to paint a mercenary company called like the Armless Avengers or something. Also, the coverage on this paint is insane. Highly recommend these. If you've been struggling to find a good metallic paint, I can't recommend these enough. I'll have a link in the description. Now, the Warhammer was full of gun barrels and joints and vents and all kinds of things. But the good old Stalker, man, MVP, the GOAT. Maybe he should have been called the Black Knight.
We thank thee, Lord, that in thy mercy...
Come on, then.
What?
How at you?
You are indeed brave tonight, but the fight is mine.
Oh, had enough, eh?
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left.
Yes, I have.
Look!
Just a flesh wound.
Look, stop that!
Chicken.
All right, now I know what that Merc Company logo would be. Let's take a quick look and see how we're doing on this paint scheme. Here we have our Phoenix Hawk, looking pretty good. Maybe a little more on the green side than the yellow side, but overall I like it. I gotta paint the canopies, and traditionally the front facing of the base, I like to match the canopies. So I'm gonna go a little bit off color scheme here, as I usually do, and find a good complementary color for this. So I broke out my color wheel, and I decided to use the green as a reference. After all, the cockpit will be contrasting the green, and it looks like red-violet is the complementary color for green. So I'm looking for warmer purples here. Red violets, warmer purples, and pinks. Now blue would actually be in the triad, but we already have blue. And if I was going to be putting a cockpit against the blue, I might go with red-orange. But no, we're going warm purples. So I grabbed an array of paints for the cockpits. Matte Black, Diabolic Plum, Warlock Magenta, Spellbound Fuchsia, Enchanted Pink, and Diviner Light. Once again, it's time to get the wet palette out because it's time to do some blending. First, I'm just going to base coat the cockpits black. Mistakes are okay and expected. I'm going to go in and repaint the cockpit struts later. Okay, so there is a downside for a stalker.
Giggity giggity, giggity goo. Stick around.
Thank you, I'm here all night. And man, this Warhammer is not much better. At least the Jenner is somewhat easier to work with. Now I lay out all my canopy colors. So when I paint cockpits, I do it similar to how I paint gemstones in Warhammer. Starting from the darkest and working my way to the light, I start in the back of the cockpit and I work my way to the front. I leave a little bit of black on the edges. My second pass, I'm covering about 80% of the lens with the next darker color. And I work my way slowly through my colors until I get to the lightest shade. This lightest shade I use for any edges of the cockpit and also the very, very front bottom of the cockpit. Now, if you're interested in a tutorial for how I do these cockpits, let me know in the comments. The Phoenix Hawk, I got to do this over and over again, considering how many different panes of glass there are in the cockpit. Here you can see I'm painting the very bottom front of the cockpit with that lightest shade. I think the effect looks pretty nice. Back to the stalker, and there's not really a whole lot to show here. Man, this thing's tiny. Now the Warhammer is also kind of a problem, but at least this is just a line. Why couldn't I have picked another Battlemaster?
Is wild small. I'm girthy. Motherfucking girthy.
Oh god.
Well, at least the Jenner gave me a bit more room to work with. Hopefully it's easier for you to see the process on this model. Now to add a specular highlight and make it look more reflective, I needed to use some white. This specular highlight really sells the effect. I usually add this right in the border of the darkest color in black. I do this for every panel. For every mech except for the stalker, this was pretty easy. And I think it looks pretty good. I almost don't know why I bothered with the stalker.
Christ, he's tiny.
Are you fucking kidding me right now?
But the Warhammer wasn't so bad. It looks alright, right? Now to paint back in the cockpit struts, I used Vivid Volt and Electric Lime. We gotta fix our mistakes. Patching up any areas where I went over too far on the cockpit. And just carefully drawing those cockpit struts back in. It was pretty easy for the Phoenix Hawk. The Jenner had a little bit of oversplash to clean up, but it cleaned up nicely. The Warhammer didn't have really that much to fix. Same for the stalker. I quickly slapped on some Vallejo earth texture.
Squishy. Squishy, squishy, squishy.
I find this to be a good base to work up from. I might add things like coconut fiber or flock later. Now before I airbrush the front facings, I go ahead and paint them white. I also paint the rest of the base in black. I just like the way black base rims look. It looks really clean to me. When I do these front facings, I really like to have a white surface to work from. It helps me to get an even coat on the airbrush and nice and bold color. I find with even Warpaint's Fanatic and Monument Hobbies whites, where the coverage is really good, you still need a couple coats to get full opacity. Now when doing this, make sure that you wait for the first layer to fully dry before doing the next layer, or you can get tearing or kind of clumpy buildup. Time to break out the masking tools again. This time I'm masking off the front facing that I just painted white. I'll be airbrushing on a color fade of the same colors I used on the cockpits. And I don't want overspray ruining all the hard work I've done on these models. So I cover them up in sheets of silly putty. Then I break out the canopy colors one more time. On the first pass, I'm painting the entire white section in purple, adding a little flow improver in between colors. And with every step, I'm covering less and less of the center portion of the base. This is how I establish a smooth gradient. Until I'm up to the lightest color, and then it's almost just a tiny spot in the middle. Once everything's completely dry, it's time to peel and reveal. And it's looking pretty good. Little couple spots on the edges of the base where the overspray got through. But that's easy to fix. Just a little bit of black, and good as new. I did a better job with my masking on the other 3 mechs, and they all turned out nicely. Mechs are looking pretty clean. Too clean though. I'm gonna dirty them up. Before I do that though, I have to seal them in with some high gloss varnish, kind of like saving my work. This thin, even coat of varnish will allow me to go back to this state. I can use mineral spirits to remove any oil wash that I built up, and this protects all that hard work. I give it about 20 to 30 minutes to fully dry, and then I whip out my oil wash supplies. I'm using ivory black and burnt umber. One of the washes will be pure black and the other one will be a mix of burnt umber and black. The burnt umber and black part will be for the bottom part of the legs and also for the base. The pure black will be a more diluted wash for the lighter parts of the mech, whereas the black and brown is going to be more grungy looking. I don't use fixed ratios on these washes, I just kind of play it by ear. I just look at the side of the cup and check the consistency. If I'm unhappy with how it looks on the model, I can always remove it with mineral spirits before it's dry. I'm doing an all-over wash with the black, but with the brown and black, I'll be focusing on the lower part of the legs and the base. Now this may look like too much, like I'm ruining the model, but don't worry, you can always remove this. This is actually a subtractive process. Unlike with acrylic washes where you have a very short working time, and it tends to stain overall the model, oil washes don't do that. You can remove it back to your paint job as long as you sealed it first. I've done a full tutorial on how to oil wash if you're interested. Links to all the supplies will be in the video description. If you use those links, you'll help out the channel. For panel lining and for recess shading, I've tried almost every method. Acrylic washes, streaking grime, panel liner, black lining, Gundam markers. They all have their ups and downs. For me, oil wash is the sweet spot of speed, quality, and control. So I let these dry for about 90 minutes. And here's my ultra grungy Phoenix Hawk. Now it's time to clean him up using soft makeup sponges and mineral spirits, the same solvent that I used to dilute the wash. 1 drop on 1 sponge is enough for 1 mech. This process is pretty quick and oh so satisfying. Kinda reminds me of Power Wash Simulator. I feel like we need a Battletech edition of that.
It feels a little dirty, but I might do it.
I know I would. I just take my time cleaning up, fixing any imperfections I can see, and then it's time for 1 more coat of varnish, but this time it's a matte varnish, because we need to knock the shine down. By the way, pro tip, if you're ever using a varnish like this, and you find that it's not drying truly matte, shake it more. I mean it, shake the ever-living crap out of this stuff. Like, shake it twice as long as you think you have to, and then double that. Phoenix Hawk is looking good post-varnish here. You can see how much the oil wash contributed. Now the reason you have to shake a matte varnish like this so much is because it's essentially a gloss varnish with some additional elements added to it. And those elements come out of the solution and settle. Now you can see the mechs are looking pretty great. And we're almost done, but I think I want to add a little bit more. Maybe some decals on the shoulders, some unit markings, and give it some identity. Now I'm of Norwegian ancestry, so I decided to go with the Free Rasselhaig Republic. Their 2nd Freeman unit has a similar scheme. Also, I got some wonderful decals from Brian over at Fighting Piranha Graphics. These are extremely high quality decals. The ship with detailed instructions on the back. To be clear, this is not a paid advertisement. Brian, who's a longtime member of the Battletech community and a founding painter on camo specs, graciously sent me a large assortment of decals for free. If you're looking for faction-specific decals, check out Fighting Piranha Graphics. They have a truly staggering selection. Hundreds of canon units from Inner Sphere, clans, mercenaries. They even have Dark Ages stuff. There's a section of generic patterns like checkering, numbers, even pinup girls. Pricing is super reasonable, $5.50 a sheet, and only 75 cents shipping for 4 sheets. International shipping starts at just $3. So if you want to support an OG member of the Battletech community and get some great decals in the process, buy your decals at Fighting Piranha Graphics. And thanks again, Brian, for hooking me up with these amazing decals. Alright, so I've got these dope looking decals with all these size options. Just gotta find the right fit. Alright, this guy right here looks like about the right size. So just carefully cut around the decal and trim up any excess, trying to get as close as possible. Get some water ready to soak the decal. Now I'm also going to be using Microsol and Microset. This gives your decals a much more painted on look, and it can also help it conform to more uneven surfaces. I soak each decal for about 45 seconds. And I paint on a little bit of the Microset on the area I'll be applying the decal to. To loosen the decal from the backing, I use either a brush or my X-Acto knife. You can gently use a brush to make sure the decal is centered. Once the decal is in the right place, I press it down with a damp paper towel to push out any bubbles. Then I apply Microsol. This solvent softens the decal tremendously. It helps it conform to surfaces and make it look like it's part of the surface. Once this is on the decal, do not mess with it. Let it dry, because messing with it you could damage or destroy the decal. I use the same method to add additional Rossel Hog emblems to the other mechs, and I also gave them some squad markings. Once the decals are dry and everything's looking good, it's time to seal these in yet again. A little bit more matte varnish will make them look like they are painted on the surface. So in this batch, I did the decals after the oil wash. On my next batch, I'm going to be doing the decals before the oil wash, and you can see the difference. I decided as a last little bit I wanted to paint the laser lenses. Going with the color coding from the video games, I'll be using green for medium lasers, blue for large lasers and PPCs, and red for small lasers. First, I base coat the laser lens in the edge of the barrel. I'm double checking Sarna in between to make sure I'm getting the right guns. Then I mix a little bit of white with each primary color, which I paint into the center of the lens and the rim of the barrel. And with that, I'm calling these guys done. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this color scheme, although I can't unsee the Incredible Hulk, or the Constructicons for that matter. What do you see though? Do you agree with my faction pick for this color scheme? When I posted it on Reddit, I got a lot of different answers. People said Liao, people said Merrick. Anyways, enough of this scheme. It's time to paint some kitty cats. I'm already at the 30-minute mark, so I should do this quick. Luckily, it looks like a pretty simple color scheme. Primed in Stynel Res Gray, and for the shadow color, I'm going to splash it with some black and some dark warm gray from underneath. I can already tell this is going to be a simpler color scheme, but I want to make sure I keep it visually interesting. I thought about those decals that Brian from Fighting Piranha Graphics gave me. Maybe I should do pirates. I'm going to need some more mechs.
Here comes a new challenger!
It's a f*** you, Archer. Nothing says get off my lawn quite like 2 LRM-20s. Yeah, and also he can flip the bird at you, unlike a catapult.
He had hands! All of a sudden he had hands! I didn't know they had hands!
So to fill out our motley crew of pirates, we've got the FU Archer here, flipping the bird. Nice little pyromaniac fire starter here. And to round it out, the big bad, the guy she tells you not to worry about, we have an Atlas Danielle variant.
Hell yeah, brother.
Using dark warm gray and warm gray, I layered up on the airbrush. This is a little darker than the Stynel Res primer, but I want to get some real depth of tone on these guys. After this, I gradually go up shade by shade. This is going to do a really good job of making smooth transitions. One of the downsides of using an airbrush, though, is everything can look too homogeneous. You don't really get much of an interesting texture with this. I mean, that's the point. You want the airbrush to be smooth, right? So I keep on spraying and I rise them up to my brightest highlight. These lighter colors have a lot of white in them. You need to make sure that you thin them more than you would other paints. I'm actually not sure about the chemistry behind this, but I know that there's more chunky pigments in the whites, so more thinning required. Next, I decided I wanted to add some texture, so using warm gray and bright neutral gray, I'll be applying these with a sponge. Got my fresh ripped up chunk of sponge and my grabber tool here. And I throw my grays on the palette. The sponge painting will give it a more interesting texture. It's also going to give me a bit of a head start on my edge highlighting. I know there's some painters out there that really love sponge painting. I know some people who use it instead of an airbrush, others in place of dry brushing. It's just another tool in the toolbox. Just taking my time here and building up the look of texture on the models. After this, I still plan on edge highlighting. So this time around, the edge highlighting is more about refining those edges. They've been roughly built up for me, so it's just a matter of cutting in these lines. While I was doing my edge highlighting, I was thinking about the pirate mechs that I've seen in the games. I know the pirate leader from MechWarrior 5 Clans is sporting a Battlemaster, so an Atlas didn't seem out of place. Spoiler alert, when you confront him at the end of Act 1, he's piloting a Corsair, which your Sidkin describes as a Frankenmech. I thought about perhaps doing a Corsair, but that felt too on the nose. I still think I want to paint one of them though. It reminds me of if the orcs from Warhammer had built a Battlemech.
Orcs? And where there's one, there's 100 of them.
Work complete.
But for now, these pirates are growing on me. A few more finishing touches. Here's how we stand after all the edge highlighting. We're looking pretty good, although we're a little bit lighter than we should be. But that's just fine because it's all going to get darkened down later. For some variety of shade, I decided to use Citadel Contrast Black Legion for the guns and missile pods. This will give a nice bit of contrast to the otherwise uniform gray, and it still fits within the color scheme. I always got to be careful when working with contrast paints because they are a bit more fluid. It's easier to get paint up in the ferrule of your brush, and if you're not careful, it can be more difficult to control. But that's part of the nature of these low surface tension paints, and it's why they've worked so well flowing into the recesses. I find I have to be a lot more careful around edges where it butts up against another color, but I can be much faster on the middle of a part. You just have to know when to go fast and when to go slow. I decided I wanted to add a spot color to make the Firestarter's fuel tank stand out. So I went with Poppy Red from Army Painter Speed Paint. Now this is a little bit of a deviation from the card, but I feel like it's okay if it doesn't take away too much from the main color scheme. Later on, if I add some more accents or decals, I'll make sure that red is my only deviation. Now I use some dark warm gray to edge highlight the black parts. The contrast paint did an okay job of contrasting, but I want to add a bit of sharpness here. You have to be careful when edge highlighting black. Go too far and then you can end up with a part that looks more gray. I just want to accent some of these edges. Next I'm using dark golden brown. This is on the darker end of the marigold part of the color scheme. I'll be using this to base coat the front facing of the bases, and also the cockpit glass. And for the lenses, I'm also mixing in a bit of coal black. I'll be using my same process for the lenses, but this time I'll be using the marigold color palette. First, I'm just blocking in all the cockpit glass in this dark brown. And then I'll be using the same process as before, gradually lightening up my color. Curious, how do you paint cockpits? Do you have a preferred method that you use? What do you think looks best on a mech? Is it a solid color? Is it a gradient? Now for the Atlas, I decided to go with two different sets of colors for the eyes. Because he's got this kind of double lens on the right side. Also, man, the Firestarter's eyes are tiny. But I love the way he looks though. Alright, next step up, I'm adding in some yellow ochre to my palette. I'm blending this in with the brown. I'm gradually lightening up the highlights. I'm not only looking at what might be realistic, but what I think looks cool. I decided to keep this footage here intact and just give you a time lapse of the process. Hopefully along with the close-ups that I also showed you, this is helpful. adding in some pale yellow for the highest highlights. I really liked painting the Archer's cockpit. Now the Shadowhawk I enjoyed painting, but there was a little bit of a downside. There was some glue from the assembly at the factory that was left on this model around the cockpit area, and also some grit on it. I don't know if this is a quality control issue that Catalyst Games Lab has had, but I would rather my models not come pre-assembled personally. At least if there's going to be nasty glue all over places it's not supposed to be. I tried to scrape it off with a hobby knife, and I did my best, and I think the layers of paint did a good job in covering the worst sins. Now for some more specular highlights in white. Just a little tiny mark in the back corner of each panel. This is partly what sells the reflectivity of the glass. I just like the way it looks. Do some quick close-ups of the other guys with little eyes. I decided to paint his nose as part of the canopy, which I understand is optional and may or may not be canon. Adding in some warm yellow. This I'm thinning down to almost a glaze consistency. I'm only applying this to the very, very bottom edge. Notice I always roll my brush to maintain a point, and I often check the consistency of the paint on the back of my thumb. I find this especially helpful when painting such small details. Now the fire starter was definitely pushing the limits of my abilities. This is probably the smallest cockpit glass I've ever had to paint. But I tried my best and I think he came out looking pretty nice. For the Atlas's other eye, I did a base coat of bold pyro red. My goal that I'm shooting for here is a magenta glowing eye. So I first base coated the two lenses in red. Then I added a spot of white to the center of each lens, and I also rimmed the edge of the cockpit. This looks weird at first, but it's a base coat for the glowing effect. For the magenta glow, I'm using Power Node Glow by Warpaint's Fanatic. This is a very thin glaze-like paint. It's a very bright magenta, and it's UV sensitive too, which will make this eye glow under a blacklight. Not like I expect to ever play under a blacklight, however. And here's how it looks once it's dry. Mixing up some gray again to fix any mistakes on the canopies. This is why I don't stress out too much when I'm painting the cockpit glass. Keep in mind you can always paint over any mistakes. And this is just part of my process. Fixing the fire starter here so he doesn't look like he's wearing false eyelashes. Alright, whipping out my blend again, this time for the bases. Once again doing that color fade. This time, rather than doing quick cuts, I'll show you a time lapse. This way you can see all in one shot my process. When I'm doing a color fade like this, I don't clean the airbrush out in between paints. All I do is I add flow improver and thinner as necessary and keep putting new paints into the cup. I do clean out my airbrush when I'm done with a step like this, or if I'm starting to work with a color that's outside of the same color family. For example, if I was working with a red and I'm switching to blue. I do a somewhat more thorough cleaning at the end of each painting session, and I do a much more involved deep clean every couple weeks. No schedule for that, just kind of as needed. Alright, they're all painted up, and now I'm just removing my masking. Breaking out the Vallejo Earth texture once again, and I'm just slapping it all over these bases. I used to use my own texture paste that I made at home, and I still use that for terrain, but I love the texture of this and how fast it dries, so I keep one of these around for minis. A downside of this paste is it does dry very quickly, so if you get it somewhere you don't want it, you have a very limited time to clean it up. Alright, moving on to the metallics, I'll be using dark aluminum this time. Same as before, painting any gun barrels, any joints, and any vents on the mechs. The shade is very subtly darker than the regular aluminum. I wish it actually was a bit darker than this. But I guess the oil wash will go ahead and do some of that job. Going back to some regular black acrylic paint to paint in the base rims. These guys are almost ready for their oil wash. But it's time for some more decals. I picked out some checker patterns, some skulls and crossbones, and some red numbering. All courtesy of Fighting Piranha Graphics. Just as before, whipping out the micro set and the micro saw, getting some water ready, and test fitting the decals, making sure they're going to fit where I want them. Prepping the area where I'm going to place them with some micro set, soaking them for 30 seconds or so before getting them ready to transfer. I decided each mech would get a skull and crossbones somewhere, and at least one checker pattern. I found it a little more difficult to apply the checker patterns because you have to be so precise. Test fitting these beforehand is essential. On a positive note, you can just count the number of squares and make your cuts accordingly. It's also helpful just to dry fit before you soak. I kept the unit numbers very simple, 01, 02, 03, and 04. I imagine the Atlas pilot is the pirate leader and these guys are his entourage. There's not really a lot of canon information on numbering conventions among the houses, and even less so among pirates. Man, doing checker patterns is really fiddly, but worth it. So here's how we're looking after applying the decals, but before the oil wash. I think they're looking pretty great. The decals are looking sharp, but they're a little too clean. Unlike last time where I did the decals after my oil wash, this time I'm going to lock these decals in with some varnish, and we're going to oil wash over the top. You can see the difference between these kitty cat pirates and the Constructicons I painted earlier. Or Hulks, your pick.
We know each other. He's a friend from work.
Just got to get these all sealed up and ready to go. Once again, time for the oil wash. This time we're going to be doing a black and brown mix. And I'm doing this one quite a bit thicker than the last one. I want them to look like a really grungy band of pirates.
You are a smelly pirate hooker.
They don't really care about how clean and nice they look. They want to look intimidating. And they might not be the most maintenance-conscious group of mech warriors. At the end of the day, they're after your loot, and after that, they're gonna scoop. Alright, after 90 minutes to dry, they're all ready for cleanup. Bit of mineral spirits and some elbow grease, and we'll see how these decals turned out. I had high hopes for this lot, and I'm really loving how they turned out. Do you guys have any good ideas for names for this pirate group? What would you call them? One last step, we gotta seal everything in with a matte varnish. Along with the oil wash, this varnish step is gonna really sell the look that these are painted on the model and not stickers. And I can already see a difference between these and the previous mechs. Got our Atlas looking like he's ready to ruin your day.
Don't buy any unripe bananas yet, because you won't live to eat them.
Got our happy little fire starter.
I'm a fire starter! Twisty fire starter!
We got our Shadowhawk ready to kill its pilot at any moment with an inopportune ammo explosion.
I'm in danger!
And Mr. Get Off My Lawn.
I cost fuck you!
Time for the sizzle reel for the finished pirates.
Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, you're cool, and fuck you, I'm out.
So is ready!
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. It really helps the channel grow. Until next time, Mech Warriors.
Don't buy any unripe bananas yet, because you won't live to eat them.